The wind howled like an animal, scratching at the windows, pushing against the walls of the old ranch house. Galen Pierce had been lighting lamps since sundown, his hands moving almost mechanically, familiar with the ritual, though the storm outside was unlike any he had seen in years. Each year, since Margaret's death, he had lit every lamp on the property, on the porch, in the barn, even in the rooms he hadn't used since she passed. He did it for her, though she was gone. It was a tradition he couldn't break, a way to keep her memory alive, to believe that somehow, in some way, she was still there with him, guiding him. But tonight, the storm was different. The snow had fallen thick and heavy, and the wind pushed against him, biting at his skin through the heavy wool of his coat as he made his way from room to room, lighting each oil lamp. The house, once full of life and laughter, now felt too quiet, too empty. And yet, there was a strange sense of peace in the flickering lights, a warmth that somehow made the blizzard outside feel a little less threatening. He didn't know why he felt the need to light every single lamp that night. He had done it every year since Margaret's passing. But this year, it seemed different. He felt an inexplicable pull, like someone, somewhere, needed to find their way home. Maybe it's just the storm, he muttered to himself as he lit the last lamp in the front room. Maybe it's just the wind playing tricks on me. But the feeling lingered, a deep, gnawing sensation he couldn't shake. Out in the barn, Galen was checking on the horses when a noise, faint but unmistakable, cut through the howling wind. At first, he thought it was the storm playing tricks on him, but then he heard it again, a soft, almost imperceptible cry carried on the wind. He froze, listening. The sound came from the direction of the gate, where the snow was falling the heaviest. It was impossible to see anything through the storm, but Galen's gut told him something wasn't right. Instinctively, he hurried to the house, grabbing the lantern from the kitchen and running back outside into the fury of the storm. The snow whipped against his face, but he barely noticed, his eyes scanning the darkness. It was hard to tell what was snow and what was shadow, but then, there it was, a dark figure stumbling through the thickening snow, barely able to keep their feet beneath them. Galen's heart raced. He couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but whoever it was, they were in trouble. Without thinking, he ran toward them, the wind biting at his cheeks, and the lantern held high in his hand. He could barely see through the snow, but the figure didn't seem to notice him until he was right beside them. "Hey!" Galen shouted, his voice almost lost in the wind. "Are you all right?" The figure collapsed in the snow before he could get any closer. A woman. Galen's heart pounded in his chest as he knelt beside her. She was barely conscious, her skin pale, lips tinged blue from the cold. Her thin shawl was wet, and her clothes were inadequate for the blizzard. Galen's thoughts raced. She was freezing, hypothermic. There was no time to waste. He couldn't leave her out here to die. He gathered the woman into his arms, careful not to jar her too much, and carried her into the warmth of the house. The fire in the hearth crackled as he laid her gently on the couch. He grabbed blankets and wrapped them around her, trying to warm her as best as he could. The house was quiet now, except for the howling of the storm outside. The woman stirred, her breath shallow, but she didn't wake. Galen hurried to the kitchen, bringing warm water to help thaw her frozen limbs, and when he pulled the shawl from her shoulders, he saw the bruises, dark, ugly marks around her wrists. His breath caught. The marks were fresh, and the pain in her face when she flinched told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a woman lost in the storm. This was someone running from something or someone who had been hurt. He wiped her forehead with a cloth, trying to bring her some comfort. She stirred again, her eyelids fluttering, and then, with a faint whisper, she spoke. "You lit the lamps," she said, her voice weak but urgent. "I thought I was dying. Then I saw heaven." Galen didn't know what to say. "Just a ranch," he said, his voice gruff. "But you're safe now." The woman's eyes flickered open, and for a moment, she looked around the room, confused disoriented. And then, in a whisper that sent a chill through Galen's spine, she said, "Don't send me back. Please. He'll kill me." Who was she running from? And why was she so terrified? Galen had no answers, but the fear in her eyes made it clear that whatever her past was, it was something he didn't want to know. Not yet, at least. She fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, her breathing shallow but steady. Galen sat in the chair beside her, watching the fire flicker and the snow continue to fall outside. It was then that he saw it, the gleam of a wedding band on her finger. A man's ring. She was married. Or at least, she had been. Galen's mind raced, but he didn't move. The snow was falling harder now, covering her tracks, and by morning, no one would know she had ever been here. He could send her away. He could pretend this never happened. But as he watched her chest rise and fall with each breath, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't. Not after everything she had been through. Not when he had already made the decision to light every lamp on the property that night. No, he wouldn't turn her away. Not now. Not when she needed him most. Hannah woke to the scent of fresh coffee, bacon, and warm bread wafting through the air, a stark contrast to the bitter cold of the night before. Disoriented, she blinked against the soft morning light, momentarily unsure if the lamps and the warmth of the ranch had been nothing more than a dream. But when her eyes adjusted, she saw Galen standing at the stove, his back to her, cooking Christmas breakfast. The sight of him, steady and strong, made something inside her flutter. She had no idea how she had gotten here, how she had found him in that storm, but it felt like a miracle. She shivered slightly, still in the nightgown she had borrowed from his late wife. It was too large, the sleeves hanging over her hands, but it was warm, and that was enough for now. As she sat up, she winced at the stiffness in her limbs, the chill that had seeped into her bones. Galen turned at the sound of her moving, his face softening when he saw her awake. "Morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. "You're just in time for breakfast." She nodded, unsure how to respond, her throat tight as if the words had frozen inside her. She hadn't realized how much she needed to speak, to tell someone everything. Galen set a plate in front of her, the food steaming, but before she could pick up the fork, he gently asked, "What happened, Hannah?" The name felt foreign on his lips, but it was his way of showing he cared. He didn't push, just waited, his presence a quiet invitation. She stared at the plate, the weight of the truth pressing against her chest. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice small but clear. "My father, he sold me to Marcus Coltrane, to pay off gambling debts. He didn't care what happened to me." She paused, biting her lip, and then continued. "I didn't even know the ceremony wasn't real. It wasn't legal. But Marcus, he didn't care about that. He claimed me as his property. He kept me isolated, locked away from everyone. He was cruel, always threatening me, keeping me afraid." Her voice faltered, but she pressed on. "Last night, he left for town. Drunk. I saw my chance and ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I heard about you, about your ranch. I thought if I could just make it to the valley, I might be safe." Galen listened, his face hardening with each word, his hands stilling as he wiped his hands on his pants. He could see the truth in her eyes, the raw fear and the bruises that marked her wrists. He didn't need any more explanation. The storm had been her escape. "You're safe now," he said softly, more to reassure himself than her. He had lost so much in his own life, but he wouldn't lose this, too. He wouldn't let her go back to him. As he sat down across from her, the quiet between them settled like an unspoken promise. Galen finally shared his own story, the one that haunted him every Christmas Eve. "My wife, Margaret, she died giving birth 3 years ago. On this night, I lost her and the baby. I've been lighting lamps ever since. For her. For anyone who needs to find their way home." His words hung in the air, heavy and filled with sorrow. But there was something else, something unspoken, a connection that neither of them could deny. "I'll light them for the dead," he said quietly, but maybe Maybe I've been waiting for the living to find their way. Hannah's eyes met his, and for the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope. She could feel that warmth in him, the same warmth she had seen in the light of the lamps. "I don't know what to do now," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "I can't go back to him." Galen nodded. He knew the trouble Marcus would bring. "You won't have to," he said firmly. "He's not welcome here. Not while you're under my roof." But the reality of their situation sank in, and Hannah's fear returned, sharper than before. But what about the town? What will people think? A woman alone with a man. Her voice trembled, her thoughts racing. "I'll leave once the storm clears. I won't bring you any trouble." "I can't." Galen's heart tightened. She was trying to protect him, but he couldn't let her go again. Not after what she had been through. "Trouble's already here, Hannah," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "And the question isn't whether we face it. The question is whether we face it together." He stood, walking to the window, watching the snow fall thick and heavy against the glass. "You don't have to go," he said, his back to her. "Not unless you want to. But if you stay, I'll find a way to keep you safe. I'll make sure he doesn't come near you." She met his gaze, the storm outside still raging, and nodded. The decision was made, though neither of them fully understood the consequences. But there was something about the way he said it, something in his voice, that made her believe that, for the first time in years, maybe she wasn't alone. Before she could say more, Galen turned toward her, his expression serious. "You can stay, but it's not just for your safety. It's because I'm not letting you go. Not again." They both knew the truth of those words, even though they hadn't fully said it. The storm had brought her here, but it was the light of the lamps that had guided her to him. And now, they had to figure out what came next. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, a figure appeared at the window, a shadow moving slowly through the snow, and the fear that had been buried deep inside Hannah surged to the surface. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice tight. Galen's gaze hardened. "Stay in the back room," he said, his voice firm. "Don't come out unless I say. No matter what you hear." The storm outside seemed to grow louder, the wind howling like a warning. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Who was coming for her now? The storm had slowed by the time Reverend Silas Hargreave arrived at the ranch, his broad-brimmed hat low against the wind, his sturdy boots crunching in the snow as he made his way to the porch. He knocked lightly, as though aware that Galen might be in a somber mood. And when Galen opened the door, the Reverend's warm smile was a relief against the bleakness of the world outside. "Morning, Galen," he greeted, his deep voice comforting. "I thought I'd check on you. Make sure you're keeping well after that storm last night." Galen nodded, inviting him in, and the two men exchanged pleasantries, though the conversation was subdued, both aware of the tension in the air. As they spoke, Galen's eyes flickered to the back room where Hannah rested, her presence still a secret. The Reverend, perceptive as always, seemed to notice the subtle shift in Galen's demeanor, but said nothing, instead speaking about the storm and its effects on the town. But then, with a gentle pause, he added, "I heard Marcus Coltrane's been asking around, offering a reward for a runaway. He's been searching for someone. Sounds like he's desperate." Galen's stomach churned, the mention of Marcus making his skin prickle. He forced a smile, hiding his unease. "I hadn't heard that," he replied evenly. "I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. Storm's likely keeping everyone inside, making the rounds harder." The Reverend gave him a look, but said nothing further, sensing the conversation was veering into dangerous territory. "Well, I'll be on my way. I just wanted to make sure you weren't alone in this weather. We all need community, Galen, especially in winter. Take care of yourself, son." With a final nod, Reverend Hargreave left as quietly as he had come, the sound of his footsteps slowly disappearing in the snow. Galen stood in the doorway, staring after him for a long moment, before he turned back into the house, his mind racing. He had been expecting this visit from the Reverend. Marcus's search would eventually trickle through the town, but now the reality of it was settling in. He needed to act. Walking toward the back room, where Hannah had stayed hidden, he knocked softly before entering. She was sitting by the fire, the faint glow casting shadows across her tired face. Her eyes were heavy, but there was a spark of determination in them that hadn't been there when she first arrived. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with worry. Galen sat down beside her, taking a deep breath before answering. "Marcus is asking about you, offering a reward. He's desperate to find you." Her face tightened, the fear returning in full force. "He won't stop," she said, shaking her head. "He'll keep looking. He'll tear this place apart if he has to." Galen could see her trembling, and though he hated seeing her so scared, he knew that the next steps were crucial. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly, "but we need to make sure you're safe. And that means we have to convince everyone that you belong here, legally." Hannah's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Galen leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "We need to tell the town you're my fiancée, that we've been courting for months, and you came here to meet me for Christmas." She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. "I know it sounds strange, but it's the only way to make it look like you're here for good. If Marcus thinks you're mine, legally engaged, he won't be able to claim you. The town will back us up." Hannah was silent for a long moment, considering. She didn't want to lie, but the alternative, being found by Marcus, was worse. "How can I do that?" she whispered. "I don't know how to lie." Galen's lips curved into a small, reassuring smile. "We'll make it simple. You're a cousin's widow from Kansas. You came to start over, and we've been writing letters for a few months. The town doesn't need to know the details, just that we're engaged and planning a wedding in the spring." Her hesitation was palpable, but she nodded slowly. "I'll do it, if it means I'm safe." Galen's heart clenched as he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure out. You don't have to do this alone." But as they sat there, planning their new story, Galen knew how fragile this lie would be. If anyone, especially Marcus, saw through it, they'd be exposed. The town had a tendency to gossip, and while Galen trusted some of his neighbors, not all of them would be so understanding about an unmarried woman living with a man, even if she was engaged. "We should practice," Galen said, trying to break the tension. "Get the details straight." Hannah laughed quietly, the first lightness he had heard in her voice since her arrival. "You're right. What's my favorite color?" she asked, a playful glint in her eye. Galen paused, his brow furrowing in mock thought. "A green." She raised an eyebrow. "You think my favorite color is green?" He chuckled, shaking his head. All right. How about red?" Hannah grinned. "Better." They spent the next hour rehearsing their story, laughing at how awkward and forced it all felt. He couldn't help but notice how easy it was to be with her. Despite the tension of their situation, a part of him enjoyed the simple, almost normal act of pretending. It was as if they were partners in this deception, and for the first time in a long while, Galen felt the stirrings of hope. The lie would protect her, at least for now, and it would give them time. But with New Year's Eve approaching and the town dance just days away, their lie would soon be tested in public. Would they be able to hold it together when everyone started asking questions? Would Hannah be able to pass as his fiancée, even for a few hours? As the day wore on, and the preparations for the evening dance continued, both of them grew more nervous, aware that the coming days would be the hardest test of their fledgling story. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. The small frontier town was alive with the buzz of New Year's Eve preparations, its narrow streets lined with snow-covered buildings, smoke rising from chimneys as families readied for the annual dance at the community hall. Galen had made the decision to attend with Hannah, now his fiancée, at least for the time being. As they rode into town, the weight of the day's events pressed down on both of them. The lie was in full effect now, their story rehearsed and ready, but Galen couldn't help feeling a pit of unease in his stomach. Would the town believe them? Would anyone ask too many questions? Hannah sat beside him, dressed in Margaret's one nice dress, the dark green fabric a perfect match for her pale complexion. It felt strange to see her wearing the dress meant for another woman, a woman who had once been his world. The memory of Margaret's absence was like a shadow in the back of his mind, always there, no matter how much he tried to bury it. But tonight, it wasn't Margaret he was concerned about. It was the lie they were telling, and the dangerous man who might be lurking in the shadows. As they approached the hall, the sounds of music and laughter spilled out from the open doors. People were gathering, a mixture of ranchers, farmers, and town folk, all eager to ring in the new year with a bit of merrymaking. Galen helped Hannah down from the wagon, and for a moment, they stood there together, the cold air biting at their faces as they took in the scene. The hall was decorated with evergreens and makeshift lanterns, the warmth of the inside leaking out through the windows. The sight of it all made Galen's heart ache. He had not been to a dance in years, and the thought of it now felt like stepping into a memory, one he wasn't sure he was ready to relive. But the moment passed quickly, and he guided Hannah inside, where a warm, bustling crowd greeted them. The chatter quieted for a second as people noticed the couple. Whispers passed from one person to another, curious glances falling on Hannah, and Galen noticed a few raised eyebrows. Mrs. Adeline Pruitt, the local shopkeeper's wife, was the first to approach them, her eyes sparkling with interest. Well, she said, her voice louder than necessary. Galen, you didn't tell us you had a fiancé. I didn't know you were courting. Her gaze shifted to Hannah, studying her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And you're from Kansas, you say? How did you meet, if I may ask? Hannah stiffened beside him, but Galen quickly took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. We've been writing for a few months, he said smoothly, his voice steady. Hannah came out here to meet me for Christmas, and we decided to make it official. Mrs. Pruitt smiled, but it was a smile tinged with skepticism. How lovely, she said, but there was something in her tone that made Galen wary. I'm sure the whole town will be thrilled to hear the news. It's about time you found someone to share your life with. Galen forced a smile, but he could feel the eyes of the other townsfolk on them. People were watching, evaluating, whispering. He had never liked attention, and tonight, it felt like they were under a magnifying glass. As the dance began, Galen led Hannah to the center of the room, where they were expected to perform the traditional first dance of the evening. Neither of them was particularly skilled, and they stumbled awkwardly through the steps, laughing quietly at their own clumsiness. The townspeople seemed amused, some offering smiles and encouragement, while others whispered amongst themselves. Sheriff Tom Daniels, a kind man with a sharp eye, watched from the sidelines, his gaze flickering between the two of them. He said nothing, but Galen felt his presence like a weight pressing down on his shoulders. The dance continued, and for a while, the tension between the couples seemed to dissipate. Galen felt a fleeting sense of normalcy. Just two people dancing, pretending to be in love, pretending that everything was all right. But then, the moment was shattered when they walked into the general store the next day. Galen had noticed Hannah growing tense as they entered, her gaze darting nervously around the room. As they made their way to the counter to pay for supplies, she stopped suddenly, her eyes locking onto something on the wall. Galen followed her gaze, his heart sinking as he saw the familiar face staring back at him from a wanted poster. Information sought. Young woman, brown hair, brown eyes, missing from Coltrane Ranch. Reward offered. The description was vague, but the unmistakable fear in Hannah's eyes told him all he needed to know. She froze, her hand gripping his arm tightly, and Galen quickly moved to shield her from the poster with his body. "We need to go," he said, his voice low but urgent. He guided her out of the store, his heart pounding. They were being hunted. As they stepped back into the cold, he could feel the weight of the situation settling heavily on his chest. Marcus's threat was no longer a distant possibility. It was a looming presence, waiting just outside their door. Riding back to the ranch, Hannah was silent, her body rigid beside him. "He's looking for me," she whispered. "He won't stop until he finds me." He won't let me go. Galen clenched his jaw, but he didn't speak. He couldn't promise her that everything would be all right. He couldn't even promise her that she'd be safe. But he could promise her this. He would fight for her. Let him look, he said quietly. He won't find you. You're safe here. You're Hannah Pierce now. The words felt like a shield, but even Galen could see how fragile it was. What if Marcus did find them? What would happen then? Back at the ranch, as they settled into their evening routine, both of them couldn't ignore the gnawing fear that had taken hold. The storm had passed, but the real threat, the one they couldn't escape, was just beginning. And with the New Year's Eve dance behind them, they knew it was only a matter of time before their lie would be put to the ultimate test. What would happen when Marcus finally arrived? The day after the dance, the weight of the previous night's events hung heavy between Galen and Hannah. Despite the smiles, the hand-holding, and the soft laughter they'd shared in public, the threat of Marcus loomed over them, a dark cloud that wouldn't dissipate. Hannah hadn't spoken much since their return to the ranch, and Galen could see the exhaustion in her eyes, physical and emotional. She had been through so much, and yet she was still standing, still trying to hold on to whatever hope she could find. But Galen knew the truth. If they didn't take action now, Marcus would find her, and their fragile lie would be shattered. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the land, Galen sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of him, his hands wrapped around the warm mug. He had spent the last few hours thinking, weighing every possible option, but there was only one choice left, one way to truly protect Hannah. It was a drastic decision, one he wasn't sure he was ready for, but he couldn't let her go. Not now. Not when she had come to him, desperate and broken, and he had promised to keep her safe. He didn't know if he could keep that promise without taking this next step. Hannah was sitting by the fire, her eyes staring into the flames, lost in thought. The crackling of the wood was the only sound in the room until Galen spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Hannah," he said softly, his gaze fixed on her. She turned toward him, her face weary, her eyes filled with a sadness that tore at his heart. She didn't ask, didn't question, just waited for him to continue. "We need to make this official. For real. We need to get married." The words hung in the air, their meaning settling heavily between them. Hannah blinked, as though she hadn't heard him correctly. "Married?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But we've already been pretending." Galen nodded, his hand tightening around the coffee mug. "I know, but a lie isn't going to protect you from Marcus. If we get married, if we make it legal, then he has no claim over you. He won't be able to come after you. He can't take you from me." Hannah's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she said nothing, her face unreadable. Galen could see the wheels turning in her head, the hesitation, the fear. He didn't blame her. The idea of marrying him, a man she barely knew, even under these circumstances, must have felt like an impossible choice. He could see the conflict in her eyes. "You don't have to marry me just to protect yourself," he continued, his voice soft yet firm. "I'm asking you because I want to marry you, Hannah. I want to make this right for both of us. And I want you to be safe. I can't stand the thought of Marcus coming after you, of you being dragged back into that life. You don't deserve that." The words were raw, more honest than he had been with anyone in years. The grief of losing Margaret had never fully gone away, but in this moment he realized that he was starting to feel something else, something that felt real again. The idea of protecting Hannah, of offering her a future, made his chest tighten with a mix of hope and fear. For the first time since Margaret's death, he was beginning to imagine a life with someone again. Hannah looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to decide if he was serious. "But what about us?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We're strangers, Galen. We don't even know each other." The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and it broke something inside him. He stood and moved toward her, kneeling in front of her as if to close the distance between them. "I know," he said quietly. "We don't know each other the way we should. But I do know this. I'm not asking you to marry me because it's convenient or because it's easy. I'm asking because I can't stand the thought of you being alone again. I don't want you to face Marcus or anyone without someone on your side. I want to be that someone." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away, though they were impossible to hide. Her breath came in shallow bursts as she tried to process the enormity of what he was asking. "You're asking me to marry you out of pity," she whispered. "No," Galen replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm asking because I care. I want you to be here, with me, not just for safety, but because I've started to care about you. I've started to want a life with you in it. And I don't expect everything to be perfect. I don't expect you to be ready to love me. Not yet. But if you'll have me, I want to try. I want us to build something together." Hannah sat still for a long moment, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The crackling of the fire was the only sound in the room as she thought. Galen could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his palms sweaty. He wasn't sure if she would say yes, if she would turn him down, or if she would ask for more time. But when she finally looked at him, her face softening, he saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the uncertainty. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared of what comes next. I'm scared that I'm broken, and I won't be able to be the wife you deserve." Galen's heart swelled with compassion. "I don't need you to be perfect," he said gently. "I just need you to be you, and I'll be here for whatever comes, whenever you're ready. We can take it slow. We can do it your way." She stared at him for a long moment before finally nodding. "All right," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "Let's do it. Let's get married." The words hung in the air between them, and for a brief moment, everything else faded away. They were no longer just two people caught in a dangerous lie. They were partners now, bound by a promise to protect each other, no matter what the future held. Galen felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but with it came the realization that the real battle was only just beginning. He had promised to protect her, and now he had to keep that promise, no matter the cost. The day of their wedding dawned cold and still, the sun barely making its way above the horizon, casting pale light on the snow-covered earth. Galen's stomach was a bundle of nerves, his usual steadiness shaken by the weight of the decision they had made. Today wasn't just about their marriage. It was the culmination of everything that had brought them together. The storm, the lies, the threat of Marcus Coltrane. And it had to be done before Marcus came for her, before he could tear apart the fragile life they were trying to build. Galen stood outside the house for a moment, taking in the quiet, snow-drenched landscape, his breath coming out in visible puffs. His thoughts were racing, but as he looked over his shoulder, the sight of Hannah standing in the doorway brought him back to the present. She was still in her worn dress, a simple but fitting choice for the ceremony. Her eyes met his, and, for a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them. She didn't need to say anything. They both knew what was at stake. He'd already asked Reverend Hargreave to come, and the man was expected any moment. Galen had insisted they marry today, before Marcus returned, before things escalated any further, and the Reverend had agreed, understanding the urgency of the situation. Hannah had been quiet that morning, her thoughts heavy with the weight of their decision, but there was a small glimmer of something in her eyes that Galen couldn't quite place. Relief? Hope? He wasn't sure. What he did know was that they were both walking into a future they couldn't fully see, but they had no choice. They had to face it together. They couldn't go back. As they moved inside to prepare, the room felt charged with anticipation, the quiet in the house amplifying the tension that had been building between them for days. Galen couldn't help but glance over at Hannah, who was sitting by the fire, her hands nervously smoothing the worn fabric of her dress. She hadn't asked for this life, he knew that. She had been thrown into a world of lies and fear, and he was offering her a way out. But at what cost? It felt like they were both playing roles they didn't quite understand. Just as Galen was about to speak, a knock at the door interrupted him. He walked quickly to open it, revealing Reverend Hargreave standing in the doorway, a concerned expression on his face. The Reverend had been the one constant through all of this, his steady presence providing some semblance of normalcy in a world that had been turned upside down. "Are you sure about this, Galen?" the Reverend asked, his voice low. Galen hesitated for a moment, but the weight of his answer was clear. "Yes, we need to do this. It's the only way to protect her." The Reverend nodded, a grim understanding in his eyes. "Then let's get this done." Inside, they moved swiftly, the ceremony short but significant. Galen and Hannah stood together, their hands clasped, their vows simple but meaningful. Galen spoke first, his voice steady but filled with emotion as he promised to protect her, to stand by her side no matter what came their way. Hannah's voice trembled as she spoke her vows, but there was an unmistakable sincerity in her words. They were both unsure of the future, but in that moment, they were certain of one thing. They were in this together. The ceremony ended with the exchange of rings, the symbol of a partnership forged in the heat of necessity. As Reverend Hargreave pronounced them husband and wife, there was a brief, almost surreal sense of peace. But it didn't last long. Before they could even begin to breathe a sigh of relief, the unmistakable sound of horses' hooves broke the stillness. Galen's heart sank, and he turned toward the window, his stomach churning as he saw 3 riders approaching through the snow. Marcus Coltrane and 2 of his men, their silhouettes cutting through the storm like predators closing in on their prey. The weight of the world seemed to settle on Galen's shoulders as he turned to Hannah. She was standing still, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. Galen stepped forward, taking her hand in his, feeling the cold tremble of her fingers. "Stay inside," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Don't come out unless I say. No matter what happens, don't come out." He could see the panic rising in her eyes, but she nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Galen gave her a reassuring smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He knew what was coming, and he wasn't sure he could stop it. He turned to the door, his hand resting briefly on the doorknob before he stepped out into the cold. The snow was falling thick, the visibility low, but he could see the riders clearly now. They were close, too close. As Galen walked toward the property line, he felt the weight of his rifle pressing against his side, a cold reminder of what he might need to do. Marcus's voice called out to him before he had even reached the edge of the field. "Pierce." The sound of his name was like a curse on the wind, and Galen's heart clenched. "I'm here for my wife," Marcus called, his voice carrying through the storm. "I've come to take her back. She belongs to me." Galen stopped, turning to face Marcus and his men. The words were like poison, but he held his ground, his rifle steady at his side. "No," Galen said, his voice cold and unwavering. "She's not your wife anymore. She's mine." Marcus's eyes flashed with fury, and he spurred his horse forward, his men following suit. "You're playing with fire, Pierce," Marcus sneered. "You can't just steal another man's wife. The law will come for you. You'll regret this." Galen's grip tightened on the rifle. "She's not your property, Coltrane. You can't have her." The 2 men locked eyes, the tension thick enough to cut through. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Then, with a sneer, Marcus signaled for his men to dismount. "You think you can protect her? You're just a lonely rancher, Pierce. This isn't your fight." Galen's pulse quickened, but he stood his ground. "It is now, and you need to leave. Now." Marcus took a step forward, his hands balling into fists, his face twisted with anger. "I'll make you regret this, Pierce. You've made a terrible mistake." Galen didn't flinch. "You've already lost, Marcus. This is my land, my wife, and you're not welcome here." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's eyes burned with fury, but there was nothing he could do. His threats were empty. He couldn't take Hannah back. Not now. "This isn't over," Marcus spat, turning on his heel and mounting his horse. "I'll be back, with the law. His words hung in the air as the riders turned and disappeared into the snow. Galen stood frozen, watching them leave, his breath coming in shallow bursts. He didn't feel relief, not yet, but he had won this round. As the snow continued to fall, he turned back to the house, knowing the danger wasn't over. But for now, they had won. He pushed open the door, stepping inside to find Hannah waiting. Her eyes were wide, full of fear, but there was a flicker of something else in them. Hope, maybe. He's gone, Galen said quietly. Hannah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For now, she whispered, stepping into his arms. But he'll be back. Galen nodded, holding her close. We'll face it together. We'll be ready. The storm raged outside, but inside they were safe for now. But Galen knew one thing for sure. They weren't finished yet. The war was far from over. The day after the confrontation with Marcus, the weight of what had happened settled over the ranch like a heavy fog. Galen hadn't left Hannah's side since Marcus's departure, staying close to her as if the mere presence of his body could offer protection. The storm had passed, but in its wake, there was an unsettling quiet that hung between them. The battle for Hannah's freedom had only just begun, and Galen could feel the tension in his bones, a reminder that Marcus's threats were not mere bluster. Hannah, for her part, had been unusually calm since the encounter, but Galen could see the fear in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. She was strong, stronger than she gave herself credit for, but even the bravest of hearts could only bear so much. That morning, Sheriff Tom Daniels had come by the ranch, as he had promised. His broad shoulders and kindly eyes were a welcome sight, but his businesslike demeanor made it clear that today was about more than just a social visit. Galen, the sheriff began, stepping onto the porch where Galen had been working. Got a word from Marcus Coltrane. He's making claims, saying that he's been wronged. Says you've stolen his wife. Galen's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the shovel in his hands, so hard his knuckles turned white. He didn't say anything immediately, just met the sheriff's eyes, waiting for the other man to continue. Now, I know you, Pierce, Sheriff Daniels went on, his voice firm. And I know Hannah, too. Ain't nobody going to convince me that you've done anything but protect her. But the law's the law, and Marcus has a few friends in town. This is going to get complicated. Galen nodded slowly. What's the next step? He asked, his voice low but steady. Do we wait for Marcus to come back with the law? The sheriff sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You know I might want to take sides, Galen. But if Marcus tries to take this further, he'll have to prove a lot of things in court. You've got Hannah's word that she was never married to him, and I'm assuming the Reverend's willing to back up your story? Galen gave a firm nod. He's been with us since the start. He'll stand by us. The sheriff looked thoughtful for a moment, then gave Galen a hard look. It's not going to be easy, but you've got the right to protect her. Just be ready. It's only a matter of time before Marcus comes around again. And when he does, you need to be prepared for whatever he throws at you. I will, Galen said simply, the resolve in his voice unmistakable. I won't let him take her. Sheriff Daniels tipped his hat, then turned to leave, his boots crunching in the snow. I'll be in touch. Keep an eye on things. Galen watched the sheriff walk away, the reality of the situation settling deeper into his chest. Marcus wasn't going to give up. He had power, money, and influence, and he would use them all to drag Hannah back if he could. But Galen wasn't about to let that happen. Not now, not ever. That afternoon, Hannah and Galen spent time together, talking more openly than they ever had before. The stress of the past weeks had kept them on edge, but now, with the sheriff's warning in mind, they had to face the truth of their situation. Sitting by the fire, Hannah quietly shared the pain of her past, the fear that had shaped her into the woman she was today. She spoke of Marcus's cruelty, the way he had isolated her from everyone, controlling every aspect of her life. I never knew how much I needed freedom until I ran, she said softly, her eyes distant. But now, I'm afraid that freedom will cost us everything. Galen reached over, taking her hand gently in his. It won't, he said quietly, his voice filled with conviction. We're not going to lose this. We're not going to lose each other. There was a long pause as they sat in silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. Hannah finally looked up, her eyes meeting his with a quiet determination. I'm scared, Galen, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that I'll never be the woman you deserve. I'm scared that I'm too broken to be the wife you want. Galen's heart ached at her words, but he squeezed her hand, offering her the comfort he knew she needed. You're not broken, he said softly. You're more than enough. We'll take this one step at a time, and I'll be with you every step of the way. I won't rush you, Hannah. I'll wait for you. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief, of trust. I'm not used to being taken care of, she whispered, but I think I could learn to let you in. Galen leaned forward, brushing a tear from her cheek. Then Hannah, let me in. Let me protect you, and let me be the man you need. The room felt warmer now, and for the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem as uncertain. There was still danger, still a threat from Marcus, but there was a sense of peace between them that hadn't existed before. That night, after a quiet supper, Galen and Hannah sat together in the front room, their shoulders brushing as they read by the firelight. The weight of the world felt a little lighter, their connection deeper, despite the looming threat outside. As they sat there, the sound of hooves approaching in the distance caught their attention. Galen stiffened, instinctively moving toward the window. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the familiar figure of Sheriff Daniels, riding alone through the snow. The sheriff's horse stopped in front of the porch, and Galen stepped out to meet him, his pulse quickening. Galen, the sheriff called as he dismounted, his face grim. Marcus is on his way, but there's something you should know. Galen's stomach twisted with dread. What is it? He asked, his voice tight. The law's on your side, Sheriff Daniels said, his voice firm. Marcus has no proof of any marriage. He can't take her back. I've spoken with the county clerk, and there's no record of any legal marriage between them. He's bluffing. Galen felt a wave of relief wash over him. But the battle wasn't over yet. Marcus would still come, still try to intimidate them. But for now, they had won a critical victory. Galen nodded, the weight lifting slightly off his shoulders. Thank you, Sheriff, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. We won't let him win. The sheriff tipped his hat, his eyes softening. I know you won't, but you need to stay vigilant. Keep your doors locked and be ready. Marcus won't go down without a fight. Galen nodded again, watching the sheriff ride off into the distance, the sound of hooves fading into the night. When he returned inside, he found Hannah standing by the fire, her face full of concern. It's going to be all right, Galen reassured her, taking her hands in his. We got this. We're in this together, and we'll face whatever comes next. That night, as they lay in bed together for the first time as husband and wife, the sound of the storm outside was a distant memory. For the first time in a long time, Galen felt at peace, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. He wasn't sure what would come next. He didn't know what Marcus would do when he found out he had lost. But for now, he had everything he needed. He had a home. He had a wife. And for the first time in years, Galen felt like he had a future worth fighting for.